summer gatherings that have focused on a whole range of issues relating to the politics of technology. So but we haven't really done up till now too much on the whole digital technology debate, so we decided to do a series of events on that. I just want to kind of give a slight context to what we've been thinking about here. So Breaking the Frame is about politicising technology, trying to overcome the idea that technology happens in some space separate from the rest of society and is unaffected by society and by politics. So that's the basic thing that we're trying to overcome, which is an idea that has come through radical movements of scientists and technologists from the late 1960s onwards, really. Digital capitalism. We thought the debate about technology and capitalism often, has that kind of assumption in it, what I would call a liberal assumption that, well, technology is politically neutral, and that, yes, capitalism uses it and abuses it for its own interests, but that it's a relatively simple matter for us to opponents of capitalism to appropriate technology for our own purposes. That's the kind of general assumption that you get in debates around technology and capitalism, and we wanted to try and point out that it's a little more complicated than that. And as the blurb from the meeting says, digital technology, of course, powers the current neoliberal capitalist system, really, in a whole bunch of ways. And so I tend to actually to the point where it's so kind of has shaped the current version of capitalism so much that instead of using the phrase neoliberalism, which is the common phrase, on the left, I tend to now say information technology neoliberalism, because I think and Ursula will talk a lot more about that anyway. But even beyond that kind of beyond that set of issues about how digital technology has shaped the kind of nuts and bolts working of the market, production, the stock market, and so on. In the 1990s, a group of French anarchists produced a very interesting paper called the Cybernetic Hypothesis, which Richard is going to talk about, which takes that analysis of how digital technology affects capitalism to to another level in a certain kind of way, and it talks about how the kind of principles underlying digital technology, the sort of cybernetic science that is used to design information technology systems, has become, in a certain sense, a kind of guiding and shaping principle for almost the whole of our civilization, and has affected society in a whole bunch of ways beyond those things that Ursula will talk about. That kind of connects very closely to the ideas that Breaking the Frame have been talking about for a few years, this idea of technocracy, of power over people through technology. I kind of think cybernetics is the kind of latest incarnation of technocracy, which has been around since the scientific revolution of the 17th century. I think it shapes the world in a whole bunch of ways, and I'm not going to preempt what Richard says, but I think one thing I think we can say is that it's shaped the whole way in which we see ourselves as social beings, in a way that has kind of made the whole old-fashioned liberal assumption about the individual subject and their relation to society quite, in a lot of ways, quite redundant, and You know, and this, as it actually led to a decay in humanism, and the rise of what so we're seeing the rise of now, you know, these ideas of post-humanism and even transhumanism, the idea that we're going to merge ourselves with machines and even be eventually superseded by machines. So that's an example of how cybernetics has kind of transformed our whole civilization. So yeah, I'll stop there now with the sort of the introduction. And first of all, I'll just introduce Ursula, who is an academic based at the University of Hertfordshire. She also runs her own consultancy, would you say? Is it?
No, it's just doesn't really exist. It's just a mechanism for receiving certain sorts of money. Yes.
Okay. Yes, she has worked on these issues of technology and capitalism from a Marxist perspective for a very long time, and is one of the, I would say, the leading thinkers in that field, certainly in this country. So yeah, she's going to talk first of all for about 15 minutes on the kind of nuts and bolts stuff.
Thank you. Well, please shut me up when the 15 minutes are done. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me. It's just so nice to you know, that such a group of people has come together that exists, you know, and that these debates are opening up again after a period of about 30 or 40 years when they seem to have almost disappeared. These sort of big debates about technology and capitalism and society. And I thank you know, it's marvellous that you're all here together. And thank you for inviting me. I feel very honoured and privileged to be here. Having said that, I'm going to be terribly ungracious and to start with a little quibble, which is that terms like digital capitalism, and there are many others like informational capitalism and cognitive capitalism and bio-capitalism and platform capitalism and so on. A lot of them around, I find them very confusing and unhelpful, because they suggest that this is some different new kind of capitalism. I prefer to just talk about capitalism, and that the phase that we're in at the moment is like that Bon Jovi song, you know, all things change and all the same. They stay the same. You don't know that? Well, anyway, it's a marvellous song. I commend it to you, although it's not in the repertoire of our generation. But he has the line. He says, "Well, it's the same damn song to a different melody," you know. And I think that capitalism, right from its inception, has used technologies as an essential part of its process of restructuring after its recurrent crises, and of its expansion and of its control over labour. And that's what I want to talk about very briefly. I'm not going to touch on the enormously interesting philosophical issues that were just raised, which I think are terribly important, but my brief was to look at nuts and bolts. So that's what I'm going to try and do, look at the political economy of it. And it seems to me that there are a few misconceptions, common misconceptions, that have to be got out of the way to understand particularly the current phase of restructuring of capitalism after the crisis of 2007-2008, which we're currently going through, and the ways that technology is being used, you know, for capitalism to reinvent itself triumphantly at the expense of workers, as it always has done in this current phase. I think there's a lot of very confused thinking about it, on the left as well as elsewhere, which I think partly comes from a slight misconception about what capitalism is. I think, especially, you know, almost like the younger you are, the more you've grown up experiencing capitalism like an all-embracing thing, or entity, whatever you want to call it, which you encounter everywhere. You encounter it, you know, in the way that you see your own body in the supermarket, in the cinema, on screens, in advertising, and it seems like this all-encompassing sort of unifying thing that sucks out your labour power and sells you back commodities. And if you think of capitalism as this, in this undifferentiated way, it's very easy to fall into a sort of idea that traditional Marxist ideas like the labour theory of value no longer apply, that there isn't a point of production, that value creation and value realisation are all part of one big thing, that, you know, just part of the sort of the chemistry of this great capitalist entity. And I think we have, in order to really understand how capitalism works, we have to remember that it consists of a lot of competing capitalists, who, some of whom fail, some of which fail, I should say. That, which doesn't mean that capitalists, the people in the stock market investing in capitalism, and you know, they don't all end up poor and going on the dole or anything like that. But capitalist enterprises fail. There is a gap between the creation of value and the realisation of value. The value in this phone, you know, some of it comes from miners in Africa and in China, the producing raw materials. Some of it comes from software engineers, the labour of software engineers, the labour of assembly workers, the labour of call center workers, the labour of the logistics workers who, you know, carry transport the phones to the port, to the container ship, to the other port, to the Amazon warehouse, to your front door. But my point is that all that sum of labour which is realised in this smartphone,
it's not a smartphone.
Well, whatever it is.
That's very important.
It's a stupid phone. That value only accrues if that phone is actually sold. It's only when you've actually bought it that value accrues. There are all sorts of possibilities along the way that the container ship might sink or might not get held up at a port in Korea, that somebody brings out a competing model of phone or a clone of it, or steals the property, or it stops being fashionable, or the batteries blow up and everybody stops buying that model, or whatever. And if any of those things happen, then that value is not realised. So capitalism has each capitalist has a very, very strong interest in making sure that the value of every single commodity is actually realised. And that puts an incredible pressure on workers all along the value chain, a pressure of time, as well as there's a kind of spatial and temporal compression that accelerates as the competition becomes more global and more speeded up. And so there's this it's pressure. It's not a generalised pressure on all workers. It's a specific pressure on each worker in their particular place in that value chain. And I think it's really important to remember that. Because if we forget that, we forget the power of those workers to actually to subvert things, to choose to withdraw their labour, to not consent to that whole process. If we see value creation is just a generalised thing, oh, I'm creating surplus value every time I go on Facebook, you know, as some people argue, then we completely lose the analysis that enables us to see the specific power of specific workers to actually engage with capitalism, to organise and to fight and to resist and to potentially bring about change. So that's, it seems to me that that's a really important thing that we have to remember. Now, in the very few minutes I've probably got left, how does capitalism use technologies for restructuring? Technologies are not adopted just because they're there. They're adopted for specific purposes by specific capitalist enterprises in particular times, right? So, technology can sit around for years and years and not be used at all, but it might suddenly be used at a particular moment. And now, one very obvious way that technology is used is to simplify and standardise work processes in order to increase the rate of exploitation of workers. This is very obvious whenever there's a major crisis. The most expensive and best organised workers tend to be the ones whose jobs are targeted first in this process. So it's increasing productivity in existing industries. We saw that after the crisis of 1973, you saw that in the way that information technologies were used, for instance, to automate the jobs of print workers and of coal workers in auto factories. The first introduction of robots into factories was, I think it was Fiat in the mid-1970s. So this isn't around. A lot of the discourse that's around at the moment says, oh, well, robots can do this, therefore they will be used to do this. Robots are only strategically introduced, automation is only strategically introduced if there's an advantage to be had from introducing them. You know, if that particular work process can be simplified and routinized, and the reserve army of labour can be drawn on to bring in cheaper workers to substitute for it. But we have to remember that that is not a permanent gain for the company that introduces automation. There's a lot of sort of discourse around at the moment that sort of imagines somehow that every factory in the world is going to be populated with robots at whatever current stage of technology we are, and somehow these robots are all going to get on with all the manufacturing that are needed, and there's going to be mass unemployment. It absolutely doesn't work like that, because each capitalist has to have a business model that makes sense of introducing robots. So the first car factory that introduced robots takes a killing. But then, as those robots become generally available on the market, every other car factory can introduce that same technology. And then the production of the robots, which incidentally becomes a new industry, then becomes increasingly standardized and the prices of robots goes down. So where's the business model? You buy your robots at the market price, you buy your raw materials at the market price, you make products, and every other company in the world is doing the same thing. How can one capitalist beat the others in this race? So either you have to, company number one has to keep on producing better and better robots, or they have to change their business model in some way. So there's a constant dynamic process. But meanwhile, we have lots and lots of jobs where it's not in the interests, particularly of capitalism, to bother automating, substituting machines for workers. And you get the contrary. What we have at the moment is an awful lot of situations where you've actually got workers being substituted for machines. Amazon Mechanical Turk is a sort of classic example of that with online, with what they call artificial intelligence, of people doing work which the customer believes to have been done by an algorithm, which is actually done by human beings, clicking away. We also have jobs like the use of Google glasses in warehouses, you know, where workers are exactly treated like machines, sent around the warehouse, told exactly which box to pick from which shelf and where to put it and how quickly to do it, and sent racing around, because it's cheaper to use human beings than robots, because they're not, you know, because these are cheap and substitutable or unorganised and low-paid workers. So that's number one. The technologies are used to simplify and routinise tasks and to increase productivity, and in some cases, but not all, to substitute machines for workers. But if there are no workers, no surplus value can be created. But then there are other ways in which technologies can be used. One is which I think you referred to earlier, the technologies which are becoming more and more important, but which are not intrinsically new, which are the technologies of control, are the technologies that monitor and control work, which enable the global value chains to be organised, and which should be immeasurably added to by the potential of the combination of the technologies like GPS with computerized technologies to survey workers in real time and real space in a very precise way. And this, as you know, this is a new insight, as Braverman pointed this out in the 1970s, that information technologies are always also technologies of control and surveillance, as well as technologies of simplification of work processes and de-skilling. So the final way that technologies are used, which I'll talk about very briefly, is as ways of generating new kinds of commodities, bringing new areas of life, if you like, within the scope of capitalist relations that previously lay outside them. And this, again, is a very, very old trend. As you could say that the history of capitalism really is the history of commodification. It's what Marx called primitive accumulation. It's bringing areas of life, of human activity that produce use values into the scope of market relations, so that these use values become exchange values. And each wave of capitalist restructure has involved new aspects of, if you like, the colonisation of unalienated aspects of life and bringing them into these alienated capitalist relations. We can take examples from the early part of the 20th century, when electricity was introduced as an important technology, and how that gave rise to the commodification of all sorts of aspects of domestic labour that had previously been carried out outside the scope of capitalist relations. So we've got new technologies, things like vacuum cleaners and washing machines and kettles and fridges and so on, all these new electrical commodities that are substituted for household labour. You can see it in things like music. You know, there's often a two-stage process where capitalism creates a service industry. It transforms what has been unpaid labour into paid service labour. And then in a second stage, that paid service labour becomes the basis for new commodities. So you see, for instance, in washing clothes, you get things like public laundries developing in the 19th century, along with urbanisation. And then things like the washing machine are the next stage of that. Similarly, in music, you get things like orchestras, you know, you get these kind of service industries where paid workers are producing music, which used to be just done for use value. And then in the next stage, you get technologies like recording and, you know, LP records and so on. And I would argue that this kind of commodification is taking place right now. There's a huge commodification taking place of the body, of biology, in the form of new technologies like new drugs, cosmetic surgery, you know, all those kind of things. The body has become a big site of capital accumulation. And sociality, the way all sorts of companies using basically a sort of rental model take a slice from our communications, whether it's by phone, using social media, or whatever. There's another development which I'm particularly interested in. It's what I have to be doing research on at the moment, which is what you might call the formalisation of the informal economy. There's a kind of area of the economy which is private services that have been carried out mostly either through sort of domestic service relationships, like people hiring cleaners and babysitters and so on, or through in the cash-in-hand informal economy, like window cleaning and gardening and whatever. And these new online platforms have entered that field through, you know, platforms like TaskRabbit and so on. and are generating enormous profits through dragging those kinds of activities into the scope of capitalist relations, and in the process subjecting the workers to the disciplines of global capital, the time disciplines, and so on. And I'll stop there. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks very much. Because Richard has to go quite, well, about 9, I think we said, what I'll do is we'll take all the questions and discussion after Richard has spoken. So that, yeah, but I do just want to ask you just one thing, which is to say something about the way in which digital technologies have been sort of the underpinning of A, globalisation, B, financialisation, and C, what's called the flexible economy.
Shall I come back to that after Richard has spoken?
Okay, okay, we can.
He did his time, yes.
We can do that. Okay, fine. So, all right. So, our second speaker is Richard Hall. He's at Montfort University. He works primarily on sort of education and the politics of the university. But he's going to talk about this French anarchist paper document that I mentioned in the introduction called the Cybernetic Hypothesis.
Hello. My apologies for legging it at 9. I have a long day and an early start tomorrow, and I need to go back to Leicester and blah blah blah. So forgive me for that. I guess I'm going to pick up on some of the themes that Ursula's raised. In particular, I guess around formativity and commodification and the kind of deeper interconnections between digital technology and capitalism. So I kind of concur that it's capital we're talking about. I want to try and stitch in some kind of thoughts. I'll blog all of this, by the way. I'm only going to talk for 10 minutes. He'll throw something at me if I overstep. I'll blog it all and with a job lot of resources, and then we'll.
You've certainly got 15.
No, all right, it's okay. Otherwise, I just chunked her, and no one wants that. So I'll blog it, job lot of resources, and you can have all of that. What I'm going to try and do is stitch in some kind of key points from the Cybernetic Hypothesis, which was. I guess there's a collective that emerged around kind of the late 90s called TIQUN, T-I-Q-U-N. They published 2 volumes of work, and they were essentially anonymous, and that was very important. Then became, I guess, kind of known as individuals. One of them gets prosecuted for some criminal damage on a French railway line in about 2008. The second of the 2 volumes is where they produced the Cybernetic Hypothesis, which, as Dave sort of said at the start, as Ursula said, is a kind of move away from, I guess, a kind of liberal hypothesis to think about issues to do with control in particular. One of the collective, Fulvia Cannavale, argued that it was a space for experimentation, that TIQUN was deliberately an anonymous space for experimentation that attempted to merge theory and practices, plural, to try to have a look at I guess with a lineage back then to things like the Situationists and kind of that sort of post-68 thing that's going on. So it's 43 pages long, it's not too long, we can kind of engage with that. 11 sections, they all start with the sections start with a couple of quotes that are then used to unpick the broader analysis, which leads to the final 3 sections, which are really about resistance and the kind, that kind of Leninist thing of what is to be done. It's that kind of what do we do now. So I'll talk a little bit about that in minutes 9 and 10. Okay. Now the cyber. I'll just start very briefly focusing on cybernetics, which I guess is kind of emerges sort of post the Second World War. Norbert Wiener is a kind of key person in this. There's a sort of intersection, I guess, of sort of the military post the Second World War, the development of sort of new technologies, and thinking about these ideas of colonization and accumulation, in particular around I guess it kind of bleeds into several different fields, kind of from sort of information science. But there's a lot that's around kind of control and maintaining order. So there's an argument that cybernetics as a kind of system of control that's trying to impose forms of homeostasis tries to make, I guess, a kind of an angel of order and a devil of disorder, right? So it's trying to effectively flatten out disruptions or noise within systems, and it's trying to do that through the kind of appropriation of data flows in particular. And this is where the kind of biotech stuff is quite interesting, because systems effectively need real-time information from individuals in order to be able to kind of dampen down noise, in order to be able to normalize, and in order to be able to reduce risk, and in order to be able to support the governance and management of systems and spaces. So, you know, one of the interesting things then for ticking and thinking about the cybernetic hypothesis is what do we do about disorder, and what do we do about noise, and what do we do about encouraging those sorts of things, and where the system wants access to fast flows of data and the fast circulation of data and information, what do we do to rupture that, and what do we do to slow it down in particular? So there's some things that they talk about, but effectively this kind of demand for homeostasis or stable, kind of effectively a form of sort of stability between interconnected elements of a system is what cybernetics is effectively driving at. And it wants, I guess, an objectively controlled, stable society as a kind of normalization of kind of there is no alternative to kind of capital. So we can normalize this, and actually if we get the component bits right, we can support things like capital accumulation, but we can effectively sort of dampen down crises in the system. So from the cybernetic hypothesis, they argue, Tick and argue, cybernetics is not a separate sphere of the production of information and communication, a virtual space superimposed on the real world. It's an autonomous world of apparatuses so blended with the capitalist project that it has become a political project. It is a gigantic, abstract machine of binary machines run by empire. And it's quite interesting they're talking about empire, because this is around the time that Hart and Negri, who've got a lineage back into the kind of autonomous Marxists, that emerged from the kind of Fiat factories, and there were a job lot of kind of workerist investigations of kind of what was going on in those factories in Italy. Hart and Negri are writing their book on empire, which then later in the noughties they write about multitude as a way of reframing the power of capital, which has become an empire. It's a global empire that's looking to deterritorialize and then reterritorialize our everyday experiences in terms of sort of trying to develop new forms of accumulation. I'm going to take a sidestep from that, just because there's a really interesting side project which is a focus on Chile under Frei, Allende, and then Pinochet. And Jessica Eden Miller Medina has written. There's a brilliant PhD, right? One of the two best PhDs I've written. Hers is from MIT, I think from 2005. She talks about the CyberSyn project, which was instigated under Frei, developed under Allende, and then bastardized under Pinochet. And that project, she argues, she talks about state machines. She talks about effectively trying to recompose or redefine the nature of the state using a kind of cybernetic approach. So she writes of new record-keeping technologies and practices, including early computers and tabulating machines. This is in the 60s and early 70s, which allowed state officials to plan economic policies and simulate their effects, to map national populations statistically with accuracy and keep detailed inventories of national resources. The resulting databases in turn shape future economic policies and their underlying theoretical frameworks, and enable new forms of state control. Now under Frei and Allende, I guess is the first kind of Marxist leader of a kind of South American country, the idea is that you might be able to redefine society in an alternative way. So I don't necessarily just want to see the discussion of cybernetics as it's a neoliberal, it's only a capitalist, you can only imagine this way of doing things. I'm not trying to say that what happened in Chile is a utopia or perfect or any of that kind of stuff, because it runs up against the buffers of power, the realpolitik of all of this. You might want to instantiate democracy, but actually you run up against hegemonic position. There are issues in economic planning at different levels of society and the state as well, which are very problematic. And certainly the nature of the kind of development of technologies at the time was a problem for them. But I argue that this was about a revolution in liberty, that they were trying to develop the use of state machines and the flows of data in order to define society in a different way. So he argues it's revolutionary because we are making a deliberate effort to hand to the people the power that science commands, and in a form in which the people can themselves use it. So that's kind of interesting, thinking about it in terms of kind of deliberative democracy, I guess. However, I guess the way in which it's kind of been subsumed now is kind of forms of primitive accumulation, but then the kind of the subsumption of society and the subsumption of previously unalienated, non-alienated parts of our lives, our bodies, our relationships, our loves, our hopes, our dreams, inside the machine. And I guess then means that we now see issues to do with kind of flows of data, feedback mechanisms, attempts to sort of generate stability in the system as a means of trying to avoid a fatal disequilibrium, which has been kind of interesting, right? Because since 2008 they can't get the show back on the road. So in spite of everything that we throw at the world, there's an inability to kind of get stable forms of accumulation since the crash. So one of the issues there, I guess, is, and we kind of see this in higher education, or actually in education as a terrain full stop, that actually this becomes recomposed around the use of technologies to try to generate data and flows of data. So the government in 2015 published the Small Business, Enterprise and Employment Act, which has, as Schedule 6 of that, is around education evaluation. The idea is that you're able to link up different data sets, so in particular educational outcomes data, and then alongside kind of HRMC data, alongside welfare data, in order effectively to be able to track across a group of people whether they're going to, generally whether they're going to pay their loans back is the kind of critical thing. But actually there's a way in which it doesn't talk about, the evaluation schedule does not talk about higher education, it talks about education settings, which means that you can effectively look to track students from their early years, foundation stage baseline, the data that is produced there, right the way through to the student who is doing performing arts at the Montfort University, comes out with this course, are they good for their debts, and when are they good for their debts, and what therefore, and how then therefore do we manage the kind of deficit across society. So we're seeing more and more. I think that's kind of one interesting example of the kind of the ways in which the flows of data and the ways in which those data sets are being kind of recomposed and repurposed enable a different sort of way of managing society, in particular society that's kind of governed increasingly by debt. And productivity is kind of fundamental in that. The Treasury produced a productivity plan in 2015, and effectively all government departments were being driven around by that. And data in particular in that, and technologies in that, are fundamental. So one of the things there, I guess, is just that I'm kind of mindful of is Harry Cleaver, the kind of the Marxist operating out of the Marxist sociologist operating out of the University of Texas. Now effectively prompts us to sort of think about trying to develop a theory of the capitalist project of reducing the world to a global work machine. Integral to this interpretation is the centrality of the struggle against work and the struggle against kind of these the cybernetic control as the most fundamental threat to that machine. So for him, this is kind of I guess he's arguing this is a kind of pivotal moment in the kind of the expansion of this kind of cybernetic project. He doesn't talk about it necessarily in those terms. Trying to think about the ways in which we have the possibility to organise I guess socially general reductions in labour time because of the ways in which we're recomposing society, but capitalism doesn't let you do that. Okay, and in part it just won't let you do that because there are issues of control, and control is fundamental. It's kind of pivotal to this idea of the cybernetic hypothesis. So Tickon again argue that it's no longer a question of static order, but of dynamic self-organisation. The individual is no longer credited with any power at all. His, forgive me, knowledge of the world is imperfect. He doesn't know his own desires. He is opaque to himself. Everything escapes him. As spontaneously cooperative, empathetic, and interdependent as he is, he knows nothing of all this, but they know everything about him. And I think that's pivotal in this kind of view of Tickon, that actually the overlay of generalized algorithms on top of the information flows that we have that enable the system to kind of unpick who we are and manage behaviors also enables the system to ostracize or marginalize voices that are a threat to the system as well, is an issue that we kind of need to deal with, or an issue that we need to kind of engage with. So my last point, am I over time?
Yeah, I'm not counting.
Okay.
You were going to talk about resistance.
It's about resistance, yeah, it's about resistance. So, resistance is kind of central to the last three sections of the cybernetic hypothesis. It picks up on other points of resistance, though. Karl Kautsky argued earlier in the 20th century that the economic machinery of the modern system of production, seeing it as a machine, constitutes a more and more delicate and complicated mechanism. It's a more delicate, more complicated mechanism, which is one of the problems with the whole kind of cybernetic obsession with ensuring homeostasis. The more complexity you introduce, the more problematic it is for the system. Its uninterrupted operation depends constantly more upon whether each of its wheels fits with the others and does the work expected of it. So if we're talking about machine breaking, there are potentially lots of moments of rupture. There are potentially lots of moments in which you can shove your stake inside one of those wheels. So Tickon argued that we have a cascade of devices, a concrete government mentality that passes through our relations. They argue we don't want more transparency or more democracy. We've got enough already of that. On the contrary, we want more opacity and more intensity. And what they were interested in was kind of generating fog. Really, they wanted to generate kind of fog in order to kind of cloud the system and to cloud the flows of information that we have. They argued that what they really wanted to do, they wanted to critique the state we're in, wanted to critique the place that we're in, the world that we're in, the use of technologies, the role of the Internet of Things, all of those things. But they also want to experiment alongside it, which I think is why the Chilean example is kind of interesting, because it's a moment to consider whether there are other experiments that we might deploy to reimagine society in slightly different ways. One of the things that they're really interested in, I guess, is slowness, because the system relies on speed. They argue that very heavily the system relies on speed. So actually, how do you kind of slow this down? It's very reminiscent of Marx's idea of the annihilation of space by time. You know, that we're actually looking to speed stuff up, and that kind of recomposition of the globe. Capital kind of floods into every moment, every space of our existence, but it wants to effectively reduce kind of circulation time. I'm not going to blather about that. So I think, well, I'll kind of end then, really, with they end on autonomy, on a fight for autonomy. And their argument is that the only thing that actually, they tend to totalise, it's one of the things that has been kind of pushed back against them. They tend to focus on the only autonomy that exists being for capital. What they argue is, autonomy means that we make the worlds that we are grow. So we make the worlds that we are grow. The empire, armed with cybernetics, insists on autonomy for it alone as the unitary system of the totality. It insists on autonomy for it alone. So it wants to use technology, wants to use data, wants to use information about you to squeeze out moments inside which you might live for use value or social value. Exchange value is the thing. It is thus forced to annihilate all autonomy whenever it is heterogeneous. We say that autonomy is for everyone and that the fight for autonomy has to be amplified. The present form taken on by the Civil War is above all a fight against the monopoly on autonomy. That experiment will become the fecund chaos, I quite like that term, fecund chaos. Communism and the end of the cybernetic hypothesis. Shut up there.
Thank you. Okay, well, because Richard has to go in about half an hour, maybe we'll start with any sort of comments or questions that people might have in relation to what he's just said, and then later on we'll maybe come back to...
Well, there's quite a deep interconnection, I think, between the two. I'm cool with...
of course, but since you have to go, and if people have got things directly to you, then maybe we'll start with those. So,
I think, Richard, what you were saying about the different aspects of education that are being linked up and being stored in databases and systems of information on people. I think you mentioned HMRC, definitely the Home Office as well too, in terms of regulating what students may have reason to stay in the country or are undocumented or whatever the situation. That's definitely the one aspect that's being monitored and is being more forcibly asked. I don't remember the term of it, but anyone involved in education, there's like a new bit of information that right now is voluntary that is asking for visa situations of families and so that's one of it in there. And the second part that I was just going to ask or mention also as well too, I think in terms of bodies, organizations that have links and how actually all the information is coming together now with the different acts. You're going to have to remind me of this, the Snoopers Charter, what's that called? The full name of it? I forget. Sorry?
Regulatory powers.
Yeah, which is in place, which now gives a vast number of bodies from HMRC, the Home Office, military police, really inane things like the food agency.